The invitation had already been approved, the archive doors were prepared to open, and Queen Camilla's name appeared beside the king's on the official attendance list. Then William intervened. With only hours remaining before the ceremony, the Prince of Wales issued a refusal, so direct that senior courtiers stopped speaking. Camilla would not attend the opening of Diana's archive, and this time, no one could persuade him to retreat. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood over the seating plan as silence tightened around the room. The Diana archive opening was a ceremony at Kensington Palace unveiling her letters, charity records, notebooks and belongings, preserving her public service and her life as William and Harry's mother. Yet the future king had made his decision clear. He refused to allow Camilla to attend, ordered her name removed from the guest list, and instructed officials that the ceremony would continue without her. An aide stepped closer and reminded him that Charles expected his wife to be present. William did not raise his voice. He set down his pen and said the day belonged to Diana, not to the compromises that followed her death. The words landed harder than anger. This was not a scheduling dispute. It was a boundary built from grief, loyalty, and silence. Camilla received the revised program while preparing for the event. She read it twice, watching her place disappear beside the king's. The queen understood. She had not only been excluded from a ceremony, she had been denied entry into one of the monarchy's deepest emotional spaces, shaped by the woman whose absence had defined her royal life. Charles had helped create the crisis. His private office added Camilla's invitation after William completed the original list, trying to turn the ceremony into reconciliation without seeking his consent. The invitation felt less like peace and more like pressure. A senior archivist warned William that one sealed display contained a private message from Diana about the treatment of her sons. An archive is a protected collection of records and personal material preserved for remembrance. Only the prince knew the message's meaning, and his refusal seemed tied to words Diana had left behind. William watched as Camilla's place card was lifted from the table and slipped into an envelope. He showed no triumph. He turned toward his mother's preserved correspondence and said that some boundaries should never have required explanation. But to understand why one removed name could shake the palace so violently, the people standing on either side of that closed door must first be understood. This was never only a dispute over attendance. For William, the archive held the voice of a mother he lost before he had learned how to defend her. For Camilla, the ceremony represented a chance to prove that the old wounds no longer controlled the crown. And for Charles, the refusal forced an unbearable choice between the woman beside him and the son who would inherit everything he leaves behind. William sat alone, with one of Diana's handwritten notes resting between his hands. The archive was not meant to be a shrine to tragedy. It was a protected collection preserving her charity work, discipline, and commitment to causes the royal household once found uncomfortable. He traced a faded sentence with his thumb, then folded the page carefully. His decision had not been born in anger. It had grown from grief held under control for decades. Camilla faced a different wound. Her presence at the ceremony would have shown that the present reign had finally absorbed Diana's legacy without fear, allowing the queen to stand inside a history that had once treated her as an intruder. She asked Charles whether he had known William planned to exclude her. The king hesitated. That pause told her everything. He had expected royal authority to preserve the invitation, yet he could not promise that authority would save her now. Catherine found William still holding the note. The Princess of Wales, the wife of the heir and his closest public partner, did not order him to forgive or retreat. She asked one question: was he protecting Diana or punishing Camilla? The prince looked toward the closed folder and delayed his answer. Catherine understood that love and resentment had begun to stand dangerously close together. Charles feared consequences beyond embarrassment. If he overruled his son at an event devoted to Diana, the monarch could appear to silence a child's grief. If he accepted the exclusion, he would weaken Camilla beside him and admit that even the crown had limits inside this memory. Either choice would leave one relationship wounded and the other exposed before the nation. The king entered William's private office carrying the original invitation, He placed it between them and asked whether any version of the ceremony allowed his wife to remain. The future king did not touch the card. He slid it slowly back across the desk. Charles watched him, then warned that Camilla believed the refusal had been decided long before the guest list changed. She knew, he said, which earlier moment had turned discomfort into defiance. That earlier incident had taken place behind another closed door, during a ceremony the palace believed had ended without consequence. 3 weeks before the archive opening, William had not planned to exclude Camilla. Her attendance was uncomfortable, but accepted. Then came a private preview at Kensington Palace, a quiet inspection involving only the family and senior archivists. One remark was made, one object was touched. And in the silence that followed, the future king decided that the Queen would never stand inside Diana's archive on opening day. Charles entered the preview, determined to keep the mood calm. Camilla followed beside him, while William and Catherine moved through the collection with restraint. The private walkthrough was a family inspection before the formal unveiling, giving them a chance to review the material without cameras, guests, or public pressure. Every person understood why that mattered. One careless moment could reopen wounds the palace had spent years trying to contain. William stopped at the centerpiece, Diana's original desk display. It preserved her correspondence, charity notes, photographs of William and Harry, and an unopened ivory envelope marked for her sons. The archive, a protected collection of records and material, had been built to hold both her public service and her truth. That balance was fragile. Camilla knew it. So did Charles. Camilla reached toward the family photograph and lifted it from the desk. She suggested moving it to a less prominent case, arguing that the opening should focus on service rather than old domestic pain. William asked her to put it back. His voice stayed controlled, but the warning beneath it was unmistakable. The Queen tried to explain that she was shielding the crown from controversy. The prince heard something darker, a request to make Diana smaller inside her own story. William noticed the ivory envelope had shifted. A senior archivist confirmed through a documented inspection note that no one had permission to touch it. Camilla denied examining the message, yet the uncertainty remained. Had she moved only the photograph, or had her interest gone further? Catherine later told William that Camilla's concern might have been ceremonial, not cruel. Still, she revealed through their private conversation that the Queen had already asked whether Diana's sealed message would be displayed. The future king said nothing for seconds. William returned after the others left. He restored the photograph, straightened the frame, locked the case, and ordered the chief archivist to require his written approval before anything connected to Diana was moved again. Then Camilla sent him a private note defending herself. One sentence about memory and royal survival ended whatever patience remained. By the time William summoned Camilla to face him, the dispute was no longer about a photograph. It was about who had the right to define Diana's place in royal history. William did not confront Camilla before advisors, secretaries, or lawyers. He waited until the corridor outside the archive had emptied, then asked her to remain behind. The Queen entered believing she could explain the misunderstanding. Instead, she found Diana's photograph waiting on the table between them, and a son who had spent years learning how to speak calmly while carrying an anger the palace had never truly faced. William closed the consultation room door after Charles had gone. Catherine remained nearby, but she did not enter. The private archive consultation room was a secure space where family members and specialists reviewed sensitive material away from public ceremony. With no aides between them, the prince placed Camilla's written note beside Diana's photograph and tapped the sentence that had enraged him. The monarchy could not remain organized around the emotional consequences of the past. Camilla held his gaze and refused to retreat. William told her the archive was not an obstacle to the present reign. It was proof of a life the institution had once failed to understand, and his hands tightened against the chair as he spoke. The Queen insisted she had never tried to erase Diana. Her attendance, she argued, could show maturity, reconciliation, and an end to decades of hostility. He answered that reconciliation could not be manufactured through seating plans. Camilla then revealed through their recorded private conversation that Charles had personally asked her to help reshape the ceremony into a symbol of unity. The king, she said, feared that excluding her would make the monarchy appear trapped by an old wound. William understood immediately. The photograph had not been moved by accident. The change was part of a larger effort to soften the opening before the public could see it. William reached for the sealed message and gave her only its central meaning. Diana had asked her sons to protect the truth of her life from being softened for royal convenience. He did not disclose every word, but Camilla's argument collapsed under what remained unsaid. She had wanted unity. The prince heard control. Camilla reached toward the photograph, as if to turn it toward herself. William placed his hand over the frame. "You do not get to rewrite her," he said. The queen withdrew, pushed back her chair, and left without asking whether she was still invited. Catherine saw her pass in silence, then entered, and found William still guarding the photograph. Yet moral certainty could not answer the questions spreading through the palace. Did William possess authority to enforce it? The argument had been personal, but the next battle would be fought through rank, ownership, and the hidden limits of royal power. The palace expected Charles to reverse the decision with a single instruction. He was the sovereign. Camilla was the queen. William was still the heir. Yet when officials opened the archive's governing papers, they discovered a structure no one had anticipated. The ceremony belonged to the monarchy, but control of Diana's personal collection had been placed elsewhere, and the final authority rested with the one person Charles was trying to overrule. Charles read the legal summary without speaking. The archive combined royal records with private material, protected by a custodial agreement, a written arrangement giving Diana's sons control over how her personal papers and objects were preserved. Kensington Palace could host the collection, but ceremonial access still required William's approval. The king could request changes through his household, yet he could not force the private custodians to admit someone against the lead trustee's written order. Charles removed his glasses and placed them on the paper. He asked whether the crown had truly reached a point where he could not bring his own wife into a palace ceremony. Anne answered carefully. Princess Anne, the king's sister and one of the family's most trusted senior figures, warned that royal pressure would deepen the wound rather than heal it. He accused her of siding with William. She replied that protecting a son's boundary was not the same as humiliating a queen. William had prepared for this challenge. After the private preview, he amended the ceremonial protocol, the official rules controlling how the event would operate, so every attendee required direct approval from the archive trustees. His exclusion of Camilla was deliberate, documented, and difficult to reverse. The prince had not acted in fury alone. He had built a barrier strong enough to withstand the monarch. Camilla's office tried another route. Her secretary proposed that she enter as Charles's spouse instead of as a separately invited guest. The trustees rejected the maneuver in a written response, stating that admission belonged to each individual and could not pass through rank or marriage. The queen remained outside, and the king's title could not carry her through the door. Charles lifted a pen and prepared to sign an instruction demanding reconsideration. His hand stopped. After a long pause, he set the pen down uncapped. Forcing the issue might secure Camilla's entrance, but it would destroy the meaning of Diana's day and turn William's grief into a public defeat. The monarch chose silence. Anne watched him withdraw, knowing his restraint had protected the ceremony while leaving his marriage exposed to a reckoning. When the decision finally reached the queen's rooms, the absence of a royal command wounded her more deeply than William's refusal itself. Camilla had survived decades of hostility by refusing to show the world when it reached her. She had endured headlines, cold receptions, and the shadow of a woman whose memory remained larger than any title. But when her private secretary entered carrying the final ceremony schedule, the queen did not need an explanation. There was no place beside Charles, no discreet entrance, no compromise. William's refusal had become official. Camilla watched her secretary place the revised program before her. Her security movement, the planned route and protection arrangements used to move a royal safely, had been removed from the schedule. Her office was told not to send a representative, and the program had already been reprinted without her name. The decision was no longer private. It had become procedure, and procedure was harder to argue with than emotion. Camilla read the pages twice, then asked whether Charles had fought for her. The secretary lowered her eyes instead of answering. The Queen folded the paper through its center until William's name remained on one side, and the empty space where hers had been fell on the other. That crease said what no courtier dared to say aloud. The heir's household had won. Charles entered moments later and confirmed that he would still attend. The king believed his absence would turn a family wound into a constitutional spectacle, meaning a public crisis involving the monarch's official role. Camilla told him that arriving without her would look like approval. He answered that staying away would make Diana's memorial about their marriage. Neither softened, neither accepted the other's logic. Camilla then revealed, through their private recorded conversation, that she had considered releasing her correspondence with William. The letters, she argued, would prove she had tried to reconcile with him. Charles stopped her immediately. He warned that publishing them would transform one painful dispute into permanent war with the future king. The Queen understood the danger, but not the silence she was being asked to endure. Camilla's final hope disappeared when she learned Catherine would stand beside William throughout the ceremony. The Princess of Wales had once seemed capable of serving as a neutral bridge. Now her choice confirmed that the heir's household was united, and the Queen would face the exclusion alone. Camilla removed the brooch she had chosen to honor royal continuity and placed it inside its case. The lid closed with a small click. Charles had already gone. Yet next night, grief pulled the two men toward the one message neither could ignore any longer. For the first time, father and son were left without Camilla, advisors or ceremony, and what passed between them altered the meaning of the refusal. On the night before the opening, Charles entered the archive without an entourage. William found him standing beside Diana's desk, staring at the sealed envelope neither man had opened in public. There were no private secretaries to soften their words, no queen to defend, and no audience to impress. For once, the king and his heir were not symbols of continuity. They were a father and son confronting the cost of everything left unsaid. Charles had come to decide whether he could attend without making Camilla's exclusion look like his approval. William expected another demand, another appeal to duty, another attempt to force peace through ceremony. Instead, the king asked him to explain. The archive, a protected collection preserving personal records and objects, had been created to hold Diana as a complete person, mother, campaigner, critic, and wounded member of the royal family. William told him that the collection could not become a polished chapter designed to make the palace comfortable. Diana's life had contained service and suffering, courage and conflict. Removing either side would protect the institution while betraying the woman. Charles listened, but his silence carried years of resistance. Charles admitted that he wanted Camilla present because public inclusion might close an old wound. William answered that wounds did not close through performance. They closed when people stopped demanding that others pretend the pain was finished. The king then confessed that Diana's memory had often felt like a judgment on every happiness he later found. The prince told him the archive judged neither his marriage nor his future, yet trying to control remembrance had turned it into conflict. Charles looked toward the sealed message and asked whether Diana had condemned him or Camilla. William revealed through their private recorded conversation that she had condemned neither. Her central request was simpler and more painful. Her sons must never allow affection, guilt, or duty to distort the truth of what they had lived through. The answer changed everything. Charles finally understood that William was not obeying revenge from the past. He was setting a boundary in the present, protecting the integrity of his mother's legacy before royal convenience could soften it. Charles placed one hand on the back of Diana's preserved chair, but did not sit. He told William that Camilla would not attend, and that he would accept responsibility publicly. The prince's anger eased, though the grief remained between them. Neither man called it forgiveness, but both understood that honesty had entered the room before ceremony returned. Their understanding came too late to contain what waited beyond the palace gates. By sunrise, the palace's most private wound had become the country's most public argument. The palace released no statement about Camilla's absence, but the empty space beside Charles spoke more loudly than any official explanation. Within minutes, broadcasters abandoned the planned coverage of Diana's archive and focused on the queen who had not arrived. The ceremony was meant to preserve one woman's legacy. Instead, It forced the entire country to decide whether William's refusal was an act of cruelty or the boundary Diana had never been allowed to set herself. William arrived at Kensington Palace beside Catherine, while Charles entered alone. Harry's representative, charity leaders, archivists, and former members of Diana's staff filled the ceremony, yet Camilla's absence dominated every whispered exchange. The archive trustees, the people legally responsible for protecting the collection, had determined attendance, palace officials said. The wording avoided naming the prince, but the public understood who controlled the final list. Charles paused beside the unoccupied place once intended for his wife. William saw the hesitation, but neither man acknowledged it. Their silence carried the weight of the previous night, when father and son had chosen honesty over performance. The king's restraint prevented a public confrontation, yet it also confirmed that Camilla's exclusion had survived royal pressure. Camilla watched the broadcast privately. When Charles appeared beside Diana's desk, the Queen turned off the sound but left the image playing. She could not bear the commentary, yet she could not look away from the history she had hoped to enter. Her title remained secure. Her place in this memory did not. The Daily Chronicle captured the crisis with a full-width photograph of Charles and William beside Diana's archive desk. Its headline screamed, "The Queen kept out." Beneath it, a smaller caption declared, "One empty chair exposes the palace's deepest divide." A national broadcaster then framed William's decision not as rebellion against the king, but as the future monarch defining where reconciliation must end. Public sympathy began shifting toward the son rather than the excluded queen. Outside Kensington Palace, a crowd gathered beside the gates. One woman placed white roses beneath Diana's photograph, while another held a handwritten sign reading, "Her story belongs to her sons." That single image became the emotional symbol of the day. William understood that public approval could still turn into cruelty if he used it to humiliate Camilla. The final meaning now depended on his own words. Catherine quietly reminded him that protecting Diana required dignity as well as courage. Charles watched his son prepare, knowing one careless sentence could reopen every wound they had contained, before millions who had already chosen emotional sides sharply. Then William stepped forward, not to condemn Camilla, but to define the boundary that would decide how the monarchy remembers its dead. William could have used the moment to expose Camilla, embarrass Charles, or reopen every wound the monarchy had spent decades trying to contain. He did none of those things. Standing inside the archive his mother never lived to see, the future king chose a quieter form of power. He explained that remembrance without honesty becomes performance, and that Diana's legacy would no longer be adjusted to protect the comfort of those who survived her. William spoke about Diana's service, her emotional courage, and her belief that public duty must never erase private humanity. The archive, a protected collection preserving personal records and objects, was meant to hold her whole story, rather than a version softened for royal comfort. He never named Camilla. The prince refused to turn remembrance into an attack, because doing so would have reduced his mother's legacy to another palace battle. Charles remained beside him throughout the address. The king's presence confirmed that he had accepted the decision, even though it carried a painful cost inside his marriage. William acknowledged that grief could become destructive when used as a weapon. He made clear that Camilla's exclusion was not punishment for the past. It protected the meaning of a day created for Diana. Camilla listened to the complete speech at Clarence House through the official broadcast recording. She understood that William had not publicly humiliated her, yet he had established a permanent limit she could not cross. The Queen still felt the rejection, but she could no longer pretend his purpose was revenge. Charles later told Camilla during a private recorded conversation that he had supported William because the archive required truth, not symbolic unity. He did not withdraw his love or weaken her title. Yet the monarch made one boundary final. Diana's private legacy belonged first to her sons. William ordered the original family photograph to remain at the center of the display. He also preserved Diana's sealed message instead of releasing it for public advantage. The choice proved that he wanted guardianship, not revenge. William closed the glass case over his mother's desk and rested his hand against it. Charles waited behind him. Father and son walked out together, not fully healed, but no longer divided over what the day had meant. The monarchy had chosen memory over convenient peace, and nothing could reverse that choice. And when the archive doors finally closed that evening, the palace understood the verdict. Camilla remained queen, Charles remained king, but Diana's memory belonged to William, and that boundary would never again be negotiated. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.